I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Maryland Primary Day is June 23rd. Early voting starts June 11th and goes through June 18th. The replacement mail-in ballots are arriving in mailboxes across the state. Information about where to drop off your mail-in ballot, where to early vote, and where your assigned polling place is for June 23rd can be found on the websites of the Maryland State Board of Elections and the Montgomery County Board of Elections for those who live in the county. Maryland has closed primaries, that is, only registered party members of the Democratic and Republican parties can vote in the state-funded and state-organized primary elections, which are used to determine the nominees of each party who will go to the general elections scheduled for November 2026. In one-party dominant jurisdictions, such as Montgomery, the primary elections are the more significant contest. Whoever wins in the Democratic primary will likely prevail in the general elections in November because there simply are not enough registered Republicans to cause an upset. Similarly, there are jurisdictions, not just in Texas and Florida, but also here in Maryland, where Republicans are so dominant that no Democrat has a hope of winning. The problem with primaries becoming the main election is that, in Maryland at least, between 20 to 25% of voters determine the outcome of elections, not even plurality, and that causes concerns about the health of democracy itself. The fastest growing demographic in Maryland and in many other states is not Democrats or Republicans, but unaffiliated or independent voters. There are competing theories of what the rising number of unaffiliated voters means. Are independent voters merely hiding their real preferences? Is it dissatisfaction or is it contentment? Most folks assume that voters want to have their say, and registering as unaffiliated means that they are dissatisfied with both major parties. There is, of course, a long tradition of third parties, some causing realignment in the party system itself. But equally, no less than Teddy Roosevelt, after having served 2 terms as president, ran for a 3rd term as a third-party candidate and lost. The structural barrier to successful third-party interventions are simply immense, and in part because the big tents of the Democratic and Republican parties simply co-opt successful third-party insurgencies. In Maryland, 3 third parties are expected to join the fray, at least at the statewide level: the Green Party, the Working Class Party, and the Libertarian Party. Third parties do not participate in state-funded and state-organized primary elections. They will pick their nominees on their own and be able to join the November ballot, but there are rules. Andy Ellis is a Baltimore activist and the presumptive nominee for the Green Party for governor of Maryland. Since he is sitting out the primary elections on June 23rd, I asked him how he saw the contest. Stay with us. I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Keibel's new album, which released today, June 5th, 2026, Clarinet Without A Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. Andy Ellis, welcome back to I Hit Politics.
Excited to be here.
As a Green Party candidate for the governor of Maryland, you are not part of the primary elections being held June 23rd, but watching from the sidelines as things play out. What are you seeing?
I live in District 45 in Northeast Baltimore, and we have a competitive primary for House of Delegates. Baltimore is notorious for peppering the streets and every sidewalk with lawn signs. Many of them put up illegally. Many of them put up in medians and things like that. But I've seen very, very few lawn signs in our competitive delegates race this year. It almost makes me feel like they got too expensive, or they all got together and decided not to do it. But that's the first thing. Less lawn signs here in Baltimore. The other thing that I'm seeing is a whole lot of people are running against the system, running as outsiders, and are trying to capitalize on what they think is an anger with both parties. That being said, I'm not sure that in the primaries, this is going to be a big change year where a lot of those folks are going to win. And so I get a sense, in 2018, I got a sense that more of those folks were in a position to win. This election, I get in a sense that more of those folks have some support, but I don't see this being a year in which there's a lot of big upsets in the primary at the state level.
There are more outsider campaigns, less likely to win. There should be some relationship between electability and...
Since I'm running as a third-party candidate, I have to have a very clear theory of electability versus candidacy. But I don't think that a lot of folks who are running as outside challengers within the party structure are articulating the same theory of action in which electability may not be what is driving their campaign. And I think, for me, that is a difference between folks that run against the system, within the system, and folks that run, like in our race, we have to have an explanation for that. Otherwise, the conversations don't get started.
Well, is your point then that if you are running within the party as an outsider, really you have no chance?
I think you can be an insider's outsider in some ways. You can be an outsider that, knows a lot of people who are working in government. You can have access to unions. You can have access to endorsements. But I don't think there is, that I've seen yet at the state level, a pathway to a sort of grassroots, buck the system and insurgent type of campaign that I've seen likely to win here in Maryland. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be one. There's a lot of state delegate and state senate races. But the ones that I'm seeing, I don't see those outsiders with the theory of political change that is going to allow them to overcome the inertia of the party machine in those areas.
I had Indivisible Montgomery folks on the show last Friday, and they said that they were going to work on behalf of Bobby Le Pen in Baltimore against Senate President Bill Ferguson.
Bobby may be the example of the person that does that this time. There may be some other Bobbies out there in the Senate or in the House races, but he's got some of that institutional support. He's got indivisible folks. He's got some of these union supports. Now, what I will say is Bobby's race has done good for changing outcomes and how Bill Ferguson governs, regardless of whether Bobby wins or not. I think he has pushed him on immigration issues. I think he has pushed him on redistricting. There is a degree to which a race like Bobby's, even if he comes short, can still offer that theory of how a challenger to the most entrenched, most powerful politician can change outcomes, even if it doesn't end up in victory.
You said you were seeing fewer yard signs. Do you see campaign move to digital or TV, or what is that the case?
Everybody and their dog is shooting videos of themselves and putting them up on social media about talking about things. And I think that's actually really effective.
Okay, let's talk about issues. What issues are you seeing?
One thing that happens in almost every conversation is a discussion about open primaries.
Explain what open primaries are.
There is a mostly closed primary system in the state of Maryland. And I say mostly closed because we have a really short window at which people can change affiliation leading up to a primary. So June 2nd was the last day that people could change their affiliation before the primary election on June 23rd. And that means that if they didn't change to Democrat or Republican, they won't be able to participate in the majority of the races on the ballot. They can still vote for school board, but they can't vote for county council, county executive, state delegate, state senator, governor, Congress, those type of things. So that is the closed primary system we have right now. And we are in a dwindling minority of states that have that kind of system where you have to be affiliated ahead of time and you can't change during the period. The reason that it's becoming important is because now there's about 50% registered Democrats, 25% registered Republicans, and 25% registered unaffiliated or other party folks. That other and unaffiliated number is growing quickly. It's the fastest growing group of it. When I say open primaries, I support the bill that Delegate Chi and Delegate Schmidt submitted this year, which would simply allow unaffiliated voters to choose one or the other ballot at the primary polling place. I think that's the simplest solution to it. There's other solutions that radically change the electoral system and try to give us a system that is like California's, where they have everybody in primary where the top two go to the general, or like Alaska has, where they have everybody in the primary and the top four go to the general.
Since we are on election reform, speak to ranked choice voting and why that might be one solution.
I tend to think that ranked choice voting is good for voters. I don't think it's particularly good at bringing about multi-party democracy. I don't think that there's anything from what we've seen in Maine, what we've seen in Australia, what we've seen in D.C., what we've seen in any of the places that have adopted ranked choice voting that says that it makes it more likely that a third party or an independent is going to break through. But I do think it's good for voters. I think it increases cooperation and collaboration in elections. I think you can see that from Mamdani and Lander working together, and New York a little bit toward the end.
All right, let's talk more substantive issues beyond electoral reform. What are you seeing?
Data centers. People want to talk about data centers. The reason that is because it captures a whole lot of anxieties people have about government and the way that things work right now. It's not just an environment question. It's not just an energy question. It's a transparency question. It's a handouts to corporations question. It's an AI question. It's a tech question. People are worried that their county government at this point is going to allow some huge energy and water sucking thing to get built in their community, and they're not going to have an opportunity to say no to it.
You have asked for a ban on data centers, not just a moratorium,
right,
but a complete ban. How does the ban answer to any of the anxieties that you have brought up?
The ban provides an opportunity for folks to figure out the science, the government, the regulation, and whether their anxieties are accurate or not. I don't think the moratorium does, and I don't think the current approach of deregulation and hypercharging the industry does.
Do you have an understanding of how asking for the ban that you're asking for leads to these anxieties being rested? Take energy, for instance. Does it make a difference whether you put a data center in Calvert or Charles or even Frederick, or you put it in Loudoun County, Virginia.
I mean, it's not an either or. If we stop them from coming on board in Maryland, I don't know that an equal number of them are going to go to Pennsylvania or Virginia. Just like fracking, there's fracking all around us, but that doesn't mean that we should turn over the fracking ban.
Fracking is different, right? Much more localized. So with data centers, noise is probably the only very localized impact.
And noise is bad.
Right. Noise is bad in terms of energy, in terms of water.
Right.
You're not going to have any real impact.
You're right about energy and water, but about noise, about trust in government, about transparency, about how that land gets used, those things are still localized. And whether a gas plant gets built on it or gas pipelines get built in order to power it because they want to put co-located gas on it.
In terms of land use, there's only one case, I think, in Harford County, where they are taking a non-brownfield, a sort of a green space, up for use for a data center. But everywhere else, whether it's in Frederick or in Montgomery or in Calvert, they are all on brownfield looking.
The places that they're looking at in Baltimore City, over in East Baltimore, where Hopkins is trying to build it and they want to put generators in, is not going to be set back from the community. And in Charles County, the recommendation was 500-foot setbacks, 500-foot setbacks, not away from communities. And, folks in Charles County live near the PUD and near the light industrial zones in which the diesel generators are going to get set up, in which the gas plants would be built. The bring your own energy approach that both the Freedom Caucus and Wes Moore have to this, they say they want nuclear, but that's a decade away from those small reactors coming on board at least. And so if we're talking about bringing our own energy for these hyperscale data centers right now, it's going to be gas.
But gas is also 8 years away.
Right. When Wes Moore started the phrase, we need to move from the party of no and slow to the party of yes and now, he's talking about building out natural gas infrastructure, getting gas plants built faster. That's where that phrase comes from for him. The Critical Infrastructure Act, it was an attempt to respond to the PSC applying environmental and safety regulations to the Frederick plant in 2023, to the Frederick data center in 2023, and it was meant to exempt their gas and diesel generators from PSC regulation. When Wes Moore signs this bill, he says, we are trying to supercharge the data center industry in our state so that we can get the economic impact and good union jobs. And there will be some union jobs for sure as a result of this. But I think the economic impact is questionable. We see all of these counties having all these data center fights bubbling up. And it started with Hogan in 2020. He extended tax cuts and tax breaks on sales and use. And then Moore didn't like the way PSC was regulating the generators in 2023. And so he deregulated that further.
What about economic development? Are people talking more broadly, not just data centers, but broadly in this election?
I was in Charles County this last week, and I was in Hagerstown this last week. One of the things that I've heard from folks in both of those places is that there needs to be smart economic development that is bringing in local businesses and supporting local businesses. We don't have that, for the most part, at a statewide level. And when we do, all those lighthouse industries that Moore talks about, those are creating good, high-paying jobs that contribute to the tax base, but they are not creating jobs for the vast majority of people who don't have jobs. Biotech is not going to be a job for most of the people who are looking for work in Washington County. Quantum is not going to be a job for most of the people that are looking for work in Charles County. And so I think there's a perception that while these things are contributing to the tax base, they're not doing anything to contribute to the job base.
Okay. What other issues are playing out?
I heard some interesting things in Kent County about state-level property tax concerns for agricultural land. The General Assembly has set property tax levels for agricultural land at a number instead of setting it at a percentage or setting it at a rate. They're having a hard time dealing with the ability to keep up on property taxes, keep up on schools, keep up on fire facilities and things like that, because they feel that the state cap on those property taxes is hurting them. And I've heard that out west, and I've heard that on the Eastern Shore. Taxes and fees in general is a thing that everybody likes to complain about. For me, the taxes question and the fees question are separate questions. I try to say I'm good paying taxes, and I would prefer a more progressive tax scale and less regressive fees and less regressive user fees and that type of thing.
Is there any serious conversation about tax reform?
I don't think there's any in Annapolis, and I don't think there's any amongst the people.
What's the debate around wealth tax? I mean, I assume that you're hearing some of that.
I don't hear anybody who is opposed to broadly taxing the wealthy. I hear some folks who will say people are going to move because at the state level, if you raise it high enough, especially in a state that is not that big, people can go to Virginia, people can go somewhere else. And at the same time, I think a lot of those people are going to leave as soon as their kids get out of grad school at UMD anyway, and they're going to go to a state where it's cheaper to retire.
What about an interstate compact on taxes since the federal government won't act?
Interstate compacts have to be a way that we move forward on taxes, on disaster relief, on transportation, probably on green energy. I mean, one of the things that we've proposed is an interstate compact for disaster relief. Nowhere close to being able to muster the kind of resources that the federal government can have. But if you look at what happened in Western Maryland last year, that also happened in Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And if those states could have worked together at the time in order to provide some form of disaster relief, it would have been better than it just coming from Annapolis alone. Maybe it includes some of the things like abortion and trans rights as well.
What is interesting is that the issues are so narrow now that in another election, we might have been talking about social issues, we might have been talking about criminal justice, we might have been talking about, schools. And essentially, schools is today a tax issue.
Right. It's interesting because our win number is 1%. We don't need to put together a 33 or 34% coalition in order to succeed at our electoral goals. We don't need to put together a 51% issue. So we can capitalize on those things that are not being talked about by the other parties. We can work closely with the teachers' unions. I think there's going to be a report that comes out about the blueprint this fall. And what I imagine the consultant that they've hired to do it is going to say is that if we're going to keep spending this money, we have to only do it on programs that have proven best practices and academic results and that type of thing. And what that is going to mean is that some of the school level programs in West Baltimore or East Montgomery County that are working for the school and the community are going to get cut because they're not going to meet that academic rigor. And they're going to replace the experimentation and community-based knowledge-driven programs with things that come out of nonprofits and universities. And I think that is going to be the means by which blueprint funding is extended. I imagine the words will be, the blueprint is our multi-generational investment in public education, but the budget is tight, and we have to make sure that we're following best practices and the norms that the industry has decided about the best way to educate children.
From your point of view, how has the primary shaped up around the housing issue or not at all?
Here in Baltimore City, I'm not hearing housing as an issue that is in the primaries. It's not in the Bobby LePen and Bill Ferguson primary. It's not in the Malcolm Ruff and Dahlia Attar primary. Both of those primaries are really on issues much more abstract and theoretical than the kitchen table issues that we hear folks are supposed to be concerned about.
All right. Let's talk about your 1%. What is the history of third parties in Maryland? Why is 1% important?
In the state of Maryland, new parties or third parties or non-principal parties, however you want to call them, get on the ballot the first time by collecting 10,000 valid signatures from registered voters in the state of Maryland. That's a petitioning process. The Green Party has gone through it. It's the same process that you use to get a charter amendment on the ballot or an independent candidate on the ballot or a referendum on the ballot. Once those parties have that, they can maintain status as a party, which means they can run candidates and voters can register with them by either getting 1% in the gubernatorial and the presidential election or by maintaining 1% of registered voters in the state of Maryland. Nobody has ever gotten close to the 1% of registered voters in the state of Maryland since 2000 when this law was put into place. And so the only way that third parties stay on the ballot without having to petition again is by getting 1% in the presidential race and in the gubernatorial race. The Green Party has gotten 1% in the presidential race 3 times. Ralph Nader in 2000, Jill Stein in 2012, Jill Stein in 2016, and Jill Stein in 2024. We've never gotten 1% in the gubernatorial race, and since 2000, when this became the law, only 2 libertarian candidates have gotten above that 1%. Sean Quinn in 14 got 1.4%, and David Vasher, I think, got 1.5% in 2022. So we are aiming to get 1% in this year's general election so that the Green Party can stay on the ballot without having to collect petitions again for 2028.
Where are you with that 1%?
It's hard to know because there's obviously no polling about whether somebody's at 1%, and 1% is sub-margin of error of any poll that we would conduct. We are participating in Maryland's public campaign financing program. We have about $15,000 that we've raised at less than $250, capped at $250 per donation. We're averaging about $30 a donation. That is more donors and more donations than any of the previous third-party campaigns this century. And we've got more donors than Dan Cox, John Myrick, and more donations than Ed Hale.
What other third-party candidates are in the fray?
The Working Class Party, who ran in 2022, is out and about at festivals and fairs saying that they're running. Their website has a ticket listed on their website. Or they don't have campaign finance committees set up yet, and they haven't filed. They have until July 5th to file. The Libertarian Party is petitioning to get on the ballot right now. I don't know how well they're doing, but they've always gotten on the ballot in the past, and they have national money that can come in. And I would say the wild card in this might be Kittleman. Kittleman withdrawing and switching his affiliation prior to the deadline means that by July 5th, if Dan Cox wins the nomination, he could enter as an independent. This is reasonably informed speculation, I would say. And, he probably has the kind of network that will allow him to get the 10,000 signatures that maybe he does.
Alan Kittleman is the former county executive in Anne Arundel County who went from Republican to unaffiliated.
Yep.
Are there any differences between counties, cities, different parts of the state as you have been traveling?
I'm going to be in Calvert County this weekend for a data center protest. I think there's going to be more people who are aligned with me in Calvert County on that specific data center question and who are willing, because they're mad at their local government and mad at the state government, to cast what might be a protest vote on data centers. Whereas I'm going to be in Tacoma Park on Sunday, and there's going to be people in Tacoma Park who just agree with us on all the issues and are likely to support Greens. They elected Dan Robinson to the to the town council in Tacoma Park. That's not happening in Lusby. We'll get the most votes in the most populous place. Ours is a race to 25 or 30,000 votes. So we need the votes in Montgomery. We need the votes in Baltimore. We need the votes in Anne Arundel. We need the votes in Baltimore County. We need the votes in Howard. Votes in PG. Can't do it without that because it's a numbers game. But I think that Charles County, where there's a big data center issue, for example, is going to be very attractive for us. I think Howard County, where there has been an organized group of protesters consistently protesting against U.S. support of Israel, is going to be good for the Palestine part of it. I think Frederick is going to be good. Then in the places that are more purple, like Washington County, I think we're going to get the vote of people who are okay with not agreeing with me on a lot of things, but like the fact that we're challenging the corruption of the two-party system and supporting open primaries.
One of the issues, actually, I'm glad you brought it up, is Palestine.
Yeah.
To what extent is Palestine an issue in this primary?
It's not. There's no meaningful Democratic primary. No disrespect to Eric Felber, but that campaign is not meaningfully engaging Westmore in a way that most people think that there is a contested Democratic primary. Nobody on the Republican side of this cares about it. And so the folks for whom Palestine was a red line in Maryland in the 2024 presidential election are not engaged in this primary at the top level. They may have a candidate at a state delegate or county council level that they're pushing. Gabe Acevero is being challenged. It has a challenger again. And I don't know that is an issue in his election, but I would imagine that he's hoping that his support of a resolution to recognize the genocide in Gaza during this year's General Assembly will mobilize a group of folks in his district that will come out and make sure they vote for him instead of Wu.
At the local level, Montgomery County, you mentioned Mithun Banerjee, there's Peter James, both of them are running for county executive. The problem has been that they have no credibility. I mean, Mithun has a long list of pending cases about properties and his duties and responsibilities as a landlord. He's in bankruptcy or close to it somewhere. Peter James comes off as really very out there with how he can change governance and all of that. They're not realistic candidates in any fashion. If that is the face of third parties or the third party effort or the multi party democracy, I have difficulty seeing how we move.
Just to be clear, both of them are running as Democrats, right?
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
But I do not think that anybody who votes for Mithun is voting for him because they want him to be county executive. I think they're voting for him because he's effectively agitating.
The Democratic Party, the Maryland Democratic Party, has moved to convince unaffiliated voters to at least temporarily register as Democrat, to have their vote count in the. But obviously, you do not want that.
It is a state-funded election in order to elect local party leadership, and that, to me, has always been the place where this move to push people to register in your party in order to vote for the primary has been the weirdest. Not for your county council candidate, but for the Central Committee folks. But aside from that, look, I think that this is a symptom of the way that we have highly sorted electoral districts and a closed primary. And so in Harford County, the teachers union is pushing people to vote Republican so that they can have a vote in it. In Cecil County, they're doing the same thing, And I think this is not just a Montgomery County problem or just a Democratic problem. It is a problem with a closed primary and a highly sorted electorate where the party who wins the primary is almost inevitably going to win, or the candidate that wins the primary is almost inevitably going to win the general election. So I don't love this. And Bobby Le Pen was in the Baltimore Sun saying that he's trying to get Green voters to register as a Democrat so they can vote for him in the primary. And I don't love this, but I also just take it as sort of an inevitable consequence of the system that we have right now with closed primaries and incredibly sorted electorates and incredibly sorted districts.
Both parties are these large tents, and they shift. And while you can change their platform somewhat by getting in there, but usually if there's somebody that is seemingly successful, they get folded into the.
Yeah, sure.
What do you do about that?
I did an interview with Bernard Tomas a couple of years ago. Bernard wrote the Decline and Rebirth of American Third Parties, and he's at Valdosta State. He's studied third parties in the U.S. quite a bit. And his takeaway from this is stop being stuck on the platform you had 25 years ago. Stick with the values that you have, but be nimble and adjust and address things that are falling through the gaps, and be ready for your ideas to be co-opted. Don't whine when your ideas get co-opted into the Democratic Party. Move on to the next thing, right? And so if we get out there and say ban data centers and a couple of insurgent Democrats and maybe some Republicans and the General Assembly put a bill together next year to ban data centers, I'm not going to say, why did you take that from me? I'm going to say, thank you very much, and then hold them accountable when they start to compromise, right? Like, I think that is the way that this has to work. And so part of success for a third party is raising an issue in a way that goes beyond our resources in order to raise it so that other folks pick it up and integrate it into their platforms. And I think we've seen a lot of that with the Democratic Party. I think they adopted Green New Deal terminology wholesale from the New York Green Party. And AOC can say she didn't, but we've all seen the pictures of her out there canvassing with Green Party literature on it, right? Like, she did, right? And so it's like, is her version of it what Howie Hawkins originally introduced when he ran for governor of New York? No, of course it's not. But is her version of it better than anything else that the Democrats have put forward on that type of climate solution? Yes, it is. And so part of the way that this has to work is a sophisticated understanding of how and who can implement ideas and how we interject them into the conversation above our resources.
Andy Ellis, good luck.
Thank you, Sunil. I appreciate it. I always love doing this, and thank you so much for reaching out and having me on.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Baltimore-based musician Seth Keibel's new album, which released today, June 5th, 2026, Clarinet Without A Net. Maximilian Jacobs on violin, Erin Murphy Snedecor on cello, R.N. Buckheister, dobro, acoustic guitar and mandolin, Tom Holtz, helicon, Rowan Corbett, percussion, and Seth Keibel himself on the clarinet. Jeff Gruber at Blue House Productions in Silver Spring recorded, mixed, and mastered the album. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.